Hello and welcome back to my channel, Skepticus. This is your boy, Adam of NOLA. And today we're doing a new episode of Breakdowns and Beatdowns. The video that we're going to look at today is from a content provider called Bible Project. And the video is, this idea could change how you think about Jesus's life and death. This is a very popular channel. They have millions of subscribers. I really actually kind of enjoy a lot of their videos because they're rather gorgeously animated and the speaker has a very nice presentational style. But nevertheless, they still stray into some things around apologetics that at times are a little off and sometimes even downright cringy. I particularly wanted to do this video today because it feels rather simpatico with another video that I have coming out very soon in the future that talks about why was Jesus even necessary? And this is kind of hitting a lot of the same subjects. So let's dive in and see what they have to say.
Why do I hear Christians say, I've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb?
Yeah, that's a really dense phrase. Let's unpack it. First, let's talk about what it means to redeem something. So, if you own something, it belongs to you.
Right.
But things can get lost or stolen, and then somebody else ends up possessing what is rightfully yours.
So I should go get it back.
And you could do that in a few ways. You could show some sort of proof of ownership. Or you might need to purchase it back, or you could just demand it back. However it happens, that transfer back to you as the rightful owner, that's what the Bible calls redemption.
So right away, they're starting off by kind of dancing around some things that they don't really want to talk about because it's an apologist's website. He mentions all these different ways that you can think about redemption, but redeem doesn't have all of the definitions that he referenced here already. Redeem means essentially one of two things. You can be redeemed as far as like, oh, people thought I'd done a bad thing and now, I did something to make up for it. I have redeemed myself. But that's usually not the way that we're talking about it in the Bible. The other meaning of redemption or redeem is much more tangible and much more simple. It's just to buy back. It doesn't mean any and all ways that you can get back something that used to be yours. It means to buy back. And I say that they're kind of dancing around this a little bit because when you talk about buying people back, what does that sound like? Oh yeah. So if you've seen anything from my God-free Bible study or just any of the other hordes of content that are out on YouTube regarding the Bible and slavery from a skeptical point of view, you would know that the Bible doesn't just tolerate slavery, it endorses slavery. It absolutely paints it as a good thing. It regulates it. It allows it. It is stamped by God as being God approved. But more importantly, when you're reading the Pentateuch, especially books like Exodus, it's striking how often God specifically refers to his people, the Israelites, in ways or with language that specifically invokes slavery. He talks about them as though they are his slaves. He talks about their children as though they are his slaves. He talks about the Hebrews in general as his possession. Now, I'm not just saying that as a negative way to refer to the idea of the chosen people, because they are his chosen people. But I mean, more specifically, as we go through the Pentateuch, he repeatedly refers to them in slavery type terms, even to the extent of saying that if they want to get their firstborn kids back from him, they need to redeem them. They need to buy them back from Yahweh. So I'm just bringing that up here. We'll get more into this video, but it's really a little bit disingenuous the way that he says this definition of redemption, or these multiple definitions of redemption or redeem, when in fact, it really is about buying back your property.
Okay, but what does it mean for a person to be redeemed?
Yeah, so imagine you lived in ancient Bible times and you ran out of money. As a last resort, you could sell yourself as a slave to pay back that debt.
I've lost my freedom.
Right. But a family member.
So remember I said they're being a little disingenuous here, because then they dive right into this idea of slavery as indentured servitude. And this is one of the primary cheat codes that Christian apologists try to use when they're trying to whitewash the whole issue of slavery in the Bible. They will make it sound as though all slavery in the Bible was indentured servitude, which can still be brutal and nasty, but is usually not considered nearly as appalling as chattel slavery. But this is a subject for another video, but they absolutely in the Bible practice chattel slavery. They endorse chattel slavery, and I mean God endorses it. And chattel slavery operates side by side along with indentured servitude. Nevertheless, he's not going to mention that. He's just going to treat it as though that's what the Bible does. Now, this video isn't even about slavery, but it's dancing all around these issues of slavery. And I want him to point this out because it's really kind of cheeky / cheesy the way he brings these things up like it's all indentured servitude and has nothing to do with the reality of slavery in biblical times. But let's continue with the video.
Member could come with money called a redemption price and claim you. And that person was called a kinsman redeemer, and they were transferring you back into the family.
Ah, I get it.
Now, the story of the Bible begins with this big idea that all creation, especially humans, belong to God. But tragically, humans have ended up being corrupted and enslaved by death.
Think about that. The Bible, according to them, starts with this idea that humans belong to God, but then they become enslaved to death. Now, the standard Christian apologetic for this will be that they somehow enslaved themselves, which is why he wanted to bring up this whole idea of indentured servitude. But you're talking about this entity that is supposedly the omnipotent, all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful creator of the universe, who created these people who are supposed to be his own. And then immediately after there's two of them, oh, look, they're now enslaved to death, which this is, quite frankly, a fairly liberal reading of Genesis, but I'm going to leave that alone for this video right now. But even if we take his reading of this, it doesn't speak well for Christianity in the first place.
God wants humanity back, and so the story of the Bible is basically about how God transfers us back into his possession, that is, redeems us.
So the story of the Bible is about how the omnipotent creator of the universe has to jump through this ridiculous set of hoops in order to buy us back from death. Think about that.
Okay, so where does the blood of the lamb fit into all of this?
Yeah, for this last step, we need to tell a story. In the scroll of Exodus, Pharaoh has claimed the lives of all of the Israelites, making them his slaves.
Yeah, they've lost their freedom. But they don't belong to Pharaoh. Israel belongs to God.
Right. So God confronts Pharaoh and demands, let the people go free, or I will take them back with displays of power.
So he doesn't confront Pharaoh. He works through his proxy, Moses, because apparently God is incapable of parlaying directly with the Pharaoh. I don't know why. You would think if he's nearly as big and bad and as powerful as he claims to be, that he wouldn't have to constantly work through these puppets like Moses and Aaron. But nevertheless, he has to go through them to try to convince the Pharaoh to let the people go. This wasn't about God just deciding they're going to let them go. This was about him having to work through him. And notice in this video, they're never going to talk about the fact that God says repeatedly in Exodus that he hardened the Pharaoh's heart. Think about that. So he wants to redeem these people. That is what this content creator claims is the point of the story, but that's not the point of the story. If the point of the story was to get the Israelites out of Egypt, God, if he is what we are told that he is, should have been able to do it like that. But instead, he has to orchestrate this grand cosmic opera back and forth of plagues and let my people go and hardening the Pharaoh's heart. He could have just frozen all the Egyptians. He could have let them breathe, but they couldn't move while the Israelites just marched out. He could have done that. He could have had all of their weapons that they could have brought against the Israelites as punishment. He could have had them disintegrate into thin air, but that never happens because freeing the Israelites was never a means unto itself. It was always explicitly in the text done for the purpose not of making them free, but of glorifying himself, of proclaiming his glory throughout the land and throughout the world. Because if this was just about freeing the Israelites, an omnipotent creator could have done this in 100 far easier ways.
You mean the plagues? But they don't work. Pharaoh refuses to acknowledge God's claim on Israel.
Right.
Pharaoh doesn't just refuse to acknowledge God's claim on Israel. Pharaoh, on multiple occasions, has his heart hardened by God. Now, to be fair, the language changes like from plague to plague, and I can't remember which ones are which, but after some of the plagues, it says that the Pharaoh hardened his heart. And after other plagues, it says that Yahweh hardened the Pharaoh's heart. And before the plan was even put into action, Yahweh told Moses that I will harden the Pharaoh's heart. So this was not just about Pharaoh deciding on his own what was going to happen. This was about God's power play, him jerking himself off for his own gratification. They also make it sound like Moses, as instructed by God, went to Pharaoh and said, hey, all of the Israelites are now Yahweh's people and have always been Yahweh's people, and now you have to let us all go. That is never what Moses says. Moses, under the instruction from God, starts from the very beginning of the plan, before the first plague, going to Pharaoh and lying to him, saying that you need to let our people go to the wilderness for a handful of days so that we can worship our God. At no point in the scripture does it say that Moses and or Aaron came up in front of the Pharaoh and said, hey, here's what's going to happen. We are Yahweh's people and we're leaving. Yahweh is redeeming us. He's taking us out. No, it was always this convoluted series of false pretenses. Read it in the book yourself.
So, in one final act of power, God makes it clear to Pharaoh that not just Israel, but all life belongs to him. God will unleash a deadly plague through the land to compel Pharaoh to free the Israelites.
He says that God makes it clear that all life belongs to him. But notice, God never bothers saying that, hey, I'm everyone's God. No, he's only the God of the Israelites. He never claims at any point in the text to be the God of the Egyptians, the God of the Canaanites, the God of the Babylonians, the God of anyone other than the Israelites. So it's really quite a claim in this video to say that God makes it clear to the Pharaoh that all life is his, when God never can be bothered to actually give a shit about any of these other people who are not Israelites.
But this plague isn't just on Pharaoh and Egypt. It will also take the lives of Israelites too.
Well, remember, every life is already enslaved by death.
Don't you love that apologetic right there? Oh, so if he kills some Israelites, some Hebrews, whatever, their lives were already enslaved by death, whatever the hell that means.
But God provides a way of safety from the plague. And this is what the Passover meal is all about, where every family puts the blood of a flawless lamb on the doorframe of their house to protect them.
How does that work?
So I went over this in my Godfrey Bible study and in the synopsis that I did for Exodus. But this is such a central part of Jewish tradition and, by extension, Christian tradition, that nobody ever stops to think about how incredibly hokey this is, or how this speaks so poorly about the so-called omniscience and omnipotence of Yahweh. So it's hokey, first of all, because your symbol for who dies and who doesn't is who slapped some lamb blood on the door. I mean, I guess you can pick any symbol that you want, but if I'm going through a neighborhood with genocide on my mind, I would like to think that my idea of who to start genociding doesn't start and end with who remembered to slap some blood on their door. Like, what the hell? And when you think about that, it's scary because it tells you that this God isn't even close to omniscient. If the Israelites are his chosen people, if the whole point is to get the Israelites out of Egypt, and if he's an omniscient God who actually knows who his Israelites are, then why does this death march depend on whether or not someone has slapped blood on the door or not? Really, you would think that God would just say, look, here's what's going to happen. Tonight, at the 10th plague, I'm going to strike down the firstborn of everyone who's not an Israelite. And if Moses or Aaron or anyone else said to God, but how will you know who's an Israelite and who isn't? The logical response from God would be, dude, I'm God. Don't worry about that. I know who's an Israelite and who isn't. That would be the action of an omniscient, omnipotent God. But instead, we have the action of a God who doesn't know who's firstborn to strike down and who to not strike down unless he sees the blood on the door. Think about that for a minute. That is pretty damn silly.
Is a symbol of a life that belongs totally to God, uncorrupted by evil or death, and that means death has no rightful claim to it.
And its blood?
Well, the blood is a symbol of its flawless life that has been surrendered over to death.
But wait, you said death has no claim over the life of this lamb. So why does it die?
Yes, exactly. It's not fair. But because it surrendered its life, it can, so to speak, give its life power for others.
Why? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and get into a PETA crying fest over the death of a lamb, okay? But why does any creature, animal, human, whatever, why does anyone have to die so that God can save someone else? Why does blood have to be spilled so that God can save someone else? Now, you can talk about the symbolism of it all you want, and that's fine. I'm not saying that there aren't certain motifs to be drawn from this, but logically, if you want to believe that this magic sky daddy of yours is truly all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving, why in the hell does saving anyone require the blood of an innocent? Now, again, you might think I'm getting all up in arms about animal rights or something, and I'm not saying it would be bad if I was. But of course, they're going to then move this forward in the video and apply this same logic to Jesus. But even at the beginning of the tradition, at Passover, why is it that the omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving God can't just save his people without shedding the blood of a life that, according to the narrators themselves, death should have no claim over. And yet, death is allowed to have this claim just to satisfy some Bronze Age rules of a warlord pagan god. How would you like to be one of my advisors? I'm using Skepticus's memberships as a way to allow you to have a voice in the content and the direction of this channel. I hope to see you in the membership pool, and I want to hear your voice in what Skepticus is doing going forward.
Up a way back to life with God.
Okay, so to go back in is like being in the house that is covered by the blood of the Lamb, protected from death, belonging to God.
Yes. So on the night of Passover,
I talk about this in a few of my other videos, but if we are to read the text literally, and of course, many fundamentalists and evangelists want us to do exactly that, it means that if any Israelite had somehow forgotten to put the blood around the door, their firstborn children would have been slain that night. Conversely, if any Egyptian got word about what was happening, if they heard some Israelites over speaking about what was about to take place, because this had to garner some attention if it had ever actually happened. But can you imagine, you have this nation that you have 1 million slaves in your nation, and they're living amongst you, serving you and working for you in all capacities. And then one day you notice that all the slave quarters start having blood smeared around their door, and they're sacrificing lambs, they're killing lambs, getting ready to feast, and they are smearing the blood all over the doors. You don't think anyone would have asked a question about this? You don't think that even a single Egyptian might not have gotten word about this and thought, even if I don't believe in that God, maybe I should smear some blood on my doorway. And if they had, does that mean that those Egyptian firstborn children would have been saved? Because the entire mechanism feels incredibly clunky and manual in the work of a being that is the opposite of omniscient.
God liberates people from death. And the next day, Pharaoh releases his claim on Israel, and so God also liberates them from slavery.
I love how he says liberates people from death. Now, I know that the standard Christian apologetic now is that Jesus Christ defeated death. We'll talk about that later. But in this time, there was no Jesus. There was no talk of Jesus. And the whole idea that any of this liberated anyone from death is nothing more than post hoc rationalization by Christian apologists. It's not like Moses was coming down saying, put the blood on your door and let's do Passover because it will liberate us from death. No, every one of those people died, of course. And I know that Christians will say that maybe those people will be saved eventually or are saved or something. But all of them died, and Moses and all of the elders and all of the Israelites, none of them thought we're doing this because it defeats death. It might defeat the death tonight of our firstborn son, but it doesn't defeat death. That is a ridiculous overreach in the narrative.
Both liberations are central to what redemption means in the rest of the Bible.
Okay, now God redeemed Israel for a larger purpose, right?
Yeah, so they could be God's partners. And
he says he redeemed Israel for a larger purpose. But keep in mind, again, what does redeeming mean? It doesn't mean just going back and seizing your property. It means buying it back. But what did God pay in this process? Nothing. He wreaked havoc upon the Egyptians. He blew all these plagues all over the land and watched everyone die, the livestock, the children, and, brought in all the locusts and everything. But what did God actually pay in this process? Nothing.
Represent his character to the nations. But Israel's story turns tragic. as they become enslaved, along with all the rest of humanity, to their corrupt desires and the deadly violence that results. And so instead of living in freedom, Israel remains claimed by death.
And so how can Israel, or anyone, be truly...
So in other words, we're supposed to believe that if Israel hadn't had these bad impulses as a nation, that their people would have lived forever, that they all would have guaranteed to have been saved. I mean, what is this whole narrative? The entire time that I was a Christian for 40 years, this was common narrative, like defeating death. And yet no one ever stopped to think about it. Literally makes no sense. Because in what respect are you telling me that we've defeated death? I understand that the answer you'll get is, oh, after you die, you will defeat death because you'll go to heaven. Okay, well, apparently, before Jesus died, you could still be saved. According to some apologists, I mean, they want to tell you that Abraham was saved because his abiding by the law was credited as righteousness. They want to tell you that these people in the Old Testament were somehow taking part in this defeat of death, even though not a single letter of this narrative has anything to do with Jesus Christ other than the symbolism that they had pasted into the story millennia after the fact when Jesus came along.
Brings us to the story of Jesus. So Jesus went around announcing the arrival of God's redemption. He led a life fully dedicated to loving God and loving others, freeing them from sickness and from death. Then Jesus went to Jerusalem on Passover weekend to confront the power of death itself, and the city leaders decide to kill him.
But he was blameless.
I love just the over-the-top flowing narrative. He went to Jerusalem to confront death itself. No, he went to Jerusalem to cause a ruckus by turning over the tables of the money changers in the temple. And they're going to talk about how then it's such a tragedy that he was killed. And I'm not saying that he should have been killed, but the point is, he knew what he was doing. I mean, if I were to go to the White House today and try to jump the fence and I were to get in there somehow and start acting crazy, what do you think the administration would do to me? I mean, they may not have me executed, although I'm sure Trump would want to. But even if I weren't executed, they would make sure that I was locked up for the rest of my life.
Those leaders have no right to claim his life.
Right.
The leaders had every right to claim his life. Now, we can sit here after the fact and say that was harsh. You can say that it was a product of some corruption amongst the Pharisees and the Sadducees and amongst the Roman governor, Pilate. But ultimately, they had every right to send people to crucifixion. They did all the time. Now, whether or not they were justified is a totally different discussion, but they absolutely had the right to execute citizens of their country.
It wasn't fair. But in an act of generous love, he surrendered his life for others.
So I know, of course, that the story is that Jesus did this willingly. And there's narrative put into the Gospels about how he prays to God and he's like, if there's any way that I can do this some other way, please make it so. But the idea that he just perfectly went willingly is such a whitewashing and plastering here. Yes, he went there willingly to cause a ruckus and to eventually get arrested. But even Jesus wanted to find some other way to fulfill this without having to die. So they just go over the top of this language sometimes about trying to make Jesus sound like he was just marching of his own free will up to the cross and saying, hey, nail me up there, guys. Hey, can you help me out? Someone put me up here. Hey, can you get some nails? No. If he wanted to die, he could have done it quicker. He could have, and you can say, well, maybe that's part of the narrative. He was supposed to suffer, but all of this actually screws up the rules of a sacrifice according to the Old Testament. And they're trying to pull this back to the Old Testament. So yes, I'm going to invoke these rules because all of the rules said that the sacrifice must be unblemished. And Jesus was the polar opposite of unblemished by the time that he finally expired on that cross.
And when Jesus was raised from the dead, it all became clear. Jesus is God's ultimate counterclaim against death. And the life of Jesus, represented by his blood, is a covering for anyone who takes refuge in him. Death could not claim him, and ultimately, it cannot claim you either.
So when Christians
I keep harping on this, and maybe I'm just being way too literal here. But even if you go to heaven, you have still died. You live, you die, you go to heaven, or you live, you die, you go to hell, right? I mean, that's the standard Christian teaching. So they keep talking about this like it's a victory over death. Now, maybe I'm being too literal, okay? Because you can say, well, if I know that I'm going to wake back up again eventually, and I'm going to go to heaven or to hell, then you could argue that in the grand scheme, you have cheated death, but you've still died. So this idea that you've defeated death just doesn't make any sense to me. If you've defeated death, that should mean that you don't die. It should be that simple. When we defeat heart disease, it will mean that nobody has heart attacks anymore. Defeating heart disease doesn't mean that every year we all have a massive heart attack, and after dying, they find a way to revive us and bring our corpse back to life. That is not defeating heart disease. We're always searching for a cure for cancer, which would be defeating cancer. And again, if every year after, let's say, the age of 70, every person contracts stage 3 or stage 4 cancer, and they have to go through chemo, and they have to go through radiation and all this other horrible treatments, and they're sick, and then they eventually die, and then we find a way to drag their lifeless corpse back to life. That doesn't mean we've defeated cancer. That just means that we put you through a horrible ordeal over and over again because we still haven't figured out how to actually defeat cancer. So don't tell me that in this scenario, we've defeated death. Again, I know that's probably too literal because Christians want to believe that after they die, they're going to heaven. In their minds, that means they've defeated death. But if you've died, death still had its day. I mean, even for Jesus, he died and he had to be resurrected. So the idea that he defeated death is just rhetorically, to me, a bridge too far.
Christians say, I've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb.
What they mean is that because of Jesus' life, they have been reclaimed by God into freedom and into a kind of life that's beyond the power of death. We belong to God, and nothing can change that.
Again, why does this have to happen? Why is it that God had to go through this whole cosmic soap opera of sending his son to earth and having him crucified and then resurrecting him in order to redeem us? This is supposedly the omnipotent creator of the universe. If he wants to have us, why can't he just have us? The only logical conclusion from this whole narrative is that God is powerless by himself against sin. God cannot defeat sin on his own. In order to get you out of the clutches of death and sin, God had to create this whole Rube Goldberg machine to try to get you out of it. Because without all of these crazy machinations, God couldn't do it on his own. That's the only way that this whole soap opera makes any sense, is if you understand it, that God couldn't figure out any other way to solve this problem. even if it is, in theory, a problem of his own making. Because you can't tell me that this is an omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving God if he had to go through all of these hoops in order to free us from death and sin. So there you have it. This is, to be fair, pretty standard apologetics right here. So even though I have qualms with many of the concepts that they are communicating, unlike some of the other videos that I've dissected, I don't feel like they are nefariously trying to twist the story. I don't think that they are trying to overtly wallpaper everything ridiculous in the Bible. They're telling you the story basically the same way that I was told the story in Sunday school. They just have nice graphics, nice little video to go along with it, and a nice speaking voice. So I don't view this channel in the same swarthy light that I view people like Frank Turek, who has no morals, no principles, and would lie and say anything he needs to just to continually toe this ridiculous Christian apologetic line. These guys, I don't think, are nearly as nefarious, but nevertheless, I don't think, like so many other Christians, they really consider all the logic of this. And I know that sounds condescending because the guy that narrates this, he's a pretty scholarly guy in his own right. He goes around and does talks on apologetics things. And I don't think that he's trying to purposely mislead people, but I don't think he actually sits down and thinks about the logic of this. He can tell the story the way that we've all heard it. He can tell you why we talk about the blood of the Lamb and God purchased us. Purchased us from who? Why does God have to purchase us from anyone or any time period or any place? And why does God already not have every resource that he needs in order to say, Adam, Joe, Mary, hey, if you followed my laws and you've asked for forgiveness, boom, you're saved. Forget the blood of the Lamb. Forget all these stupid hoop jumps and rules that make no sense. Let's just say that you have served me well and you've done right by your fellow man and you've worshiped me well and you've asked for forgiveness, so I will grant it and you are saved. I guess that God cannot do that. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of Breakdowns and Beatdowns. If I have said anything in any way that has offended or misrepresented Yahweh or Jebus or the Holy Spirit or Bible Project or anyone else, I'm all ears. If any of the deities of this dark universe want to chime in at any moment and have their say, I am always willing to hear their words. Yeah, that's what I thought. I want to give special thanks to the channel members. You guys are very dear to me. Thank you for being here on this video. I hope to see you on many more. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.